apartment, and eerily enough, the only thing missing is Laureen herself. The house is pretty much exactly how she left it, and again, none of Laureen's stuff is missing. Now, to me, this is significant because the police note there are no signs of a struggle, and given the door situation, they start to form a theory that maybe Laureen ran away. Obviously, Mama Judith shoots this down immediately. She knows her kid, and that is not what happened here. Now, side note, I don't think any mom is going to admit that there's a possibility their kid has run away, even if there is, when they go missing. I think a lot of moms want the case to be worked as foul play just to make sure that it's ruled out before considering that their kid didn't want to be there with them anymore. But in this scenario, I agree with Mama Judith. Her kid went everywhere with her. They were super close, and if she's going to run away, she would take some stuff with her, right? Wouldn't anybody take something with them? Purse, wallet, money, some clothes, something. But Laureen did none of that. It just seems odd to look at this scene and be like, yep, she ran, given that her mom and her were on good terms, and there seemed to be a level of respect between them. At the very least, I feel like she would have left a note or some shit to explain. Luckily, some police felt differently than the theory forming of her running away. This was soon backed up even further by an even more suspiciously creepy discovery. Remember the pitch black hallways from the entrance of the building to the third floor that both Mama Judith and police noticed when arriving that was totally worthy of shitting our pants? Yeah, it gets worse. Much worse. Police discovered that this was not from a mere fuse blown or power outage or any completely normal occurring reason that Mama Judith chalked it up to as she headed to her apartment. Someone took the time to go to each individual light and unscrew them just enough to not light up. I mean, what the fuck? That smells of some serious, premeditated, thought-out, planned, sneaky as fuck, sinister bullshit. My immediate thoughts as a paranoid mom / wannabe badass detective would be to rack my brain and try to remember if I saw the hallway lights on the night before. If not, when was the last time I saw them functioning? Did I see any maintenance workers working on them at any point within the last couple of days that could potentially point to this not being directly related to this night? If not, it leads one to believe that this is directly related to this disappearance. Remember, the voices in the hallway that Van Boy heard? One account states that the voices were also heard by neighbors. Could this have been the people or peoples unscrewing the lights? The details of this investigation are so fucking vague, and it drives me up the fucking wall because I want to know, did the police interview the neighbors and ask if they heard anything unusual that night? Did they notice the hallway lights on earlier in the evening, or did they notice they were out prior to this? I'm sure these had to have been asked, but the fact that it is not stated anywhere makes me want to just know what the answers were, or if they were even asked these questions. Anyway, police continue to canvass the neighboring area in hopes of discovering any sort of sign pointing to where Laureen is. They track down Man-Boy and get his account of the events that happened. His story remains the same, that he heard voices in the hallway, thought it was Mama Judith, and fucking booked it out the back door. He again distinctively remembers hearing Laureen lock the door behind him. They ask him if he could be remembering wrong, and he is adamant that that is what happened. Given all the circumstantial evidence they have found so far, the theory of her running away starts to fade, and foul play starts to become their main theory as to what happened to Laureen. They kick it into high gear and start passing out and hanging flyers everywhere. The local news outlets start broadcasting the case, newspapers running Laureen's story on the front page, and more police officers are assigned to the case in efforts to get this shit solved. Leads were coming in, but none of them were actually leading to any sort of solid thread in this case. The majority were just rumors that there was a second male there, like previously mentioned. Now, if multiple rumors are sprouting up with the same story, I feel like there has to be some shred of truth to it somehow. Kind of like the telephone game. One person whispers something into another person's ear, and it passes from ear to ear until it reaches the end, and it's not exactly what was said, but it's a version of it. I feel like this is what happened here. So I still can't rule out the possibility, even though this suspected person has never been confirmed. Oddly enough, while digging through the dark recesses of Reddit, I found a thread of someone claiming to be the daughter of Kristen, and that her mom did in fact tell her there was a second person, which it's Reddit, so make of it what you will. But on the sliver of a chance of it being true, I thought I would throw it in there. But Manboy and Kristen always officially maintained that it was only the three of them there. So let's fast forward here to October of 1980, about 6 months after Laureen's disappearance. Nobody has seen or heard from her, and the case is still ongoing, but it's going cold. Police have since been assigned to other cases, and it's just there. One day, Mama Judith is sitting down, going through her phone bill, and something catches her eye. She notices 3 collect call charges on her bill that she did not make. The charges took place back in July, which it's now October, so I'm kind of curious as to why we're looking at 3-month-old phone bills, but okay. And they originated from California and were placed to another number in California. Now, Mama Judith knows that she did not make these calls, and she doesn't know a single soul in California that could possibly explain away these charges. So she immediately reports these suspicious charges to the police. Now, collect calling is something most people these days are not familiar with. They were phasing out even when I was a kid, so my knowledge is very limited on how they work. I always just assumed it was when you could place a call to someone from essentially anywhere, and the person you were calling could either accept or reject the incoming charges. At first, just assuming that was all there was to it, I thought to myself, how is it possible that Mama Judith doesn't know who these came from? So I Googled it, and it's a little more than that. Here's what I found. You could place a collect call from anywhere, from either a payphone or a landline, because cell phones just weren't really a thing yet, and you would be prompted to enter a PIN. The PIN was unique to your account with your telephone landline you had the PIN set up for. I'm assuming this went through your telephone service provider and the account information you gave them. The charges were then billed to your monthly statement you'd receive. Some sources stated that alternatively, you could dial 0 and then the landline, in this case Mama Judith's landline, and that would be sufficient enough to make a call that would be billed to that landline. Now, knowing that made this 1,000 times more easy to understand, and really it questions the nature of these calls. So according to one source, the calls were placed on October 1st, 1980. 2 of the 3 calls originated from a payphone at a Santa Monica hotel located in Los Angeles County, California, to a Santa Ana motel located in Orange County, California. So I'm not super familiar with the Santa Monica area, but I am definitely familiar with the city of Santa Ana. It's definitely a larger city compared to its surrounding cities. It is a mainly Hispanic community. It has a lot of historical buildings closer to downtown. And a fun little side note, the exterior of the Santa Ana Courthouse building was actually used for filming for the 2nd season of American Horror Story Asylum. Thought that was kind of cool. Unfortunately, it is a moderately impoverished area. Again, comparatively to its neighboring cities and SoCal in general. There is a very high crime rate and very few categorized, quote-unquote, safe neighborhoods. Crimes in Santa Ana range from gang violence, domestic violence, child abductions and abuse, human trafficking, hit and runs, copious amounts of drug-related crimes, murder, and quite a bit of prostitution, and that's just to name a few. So when I read that 2 of these calls were tied to a Santa Ana motel, my heart literally dropped into my ass. Without a name of the motel, it's kind of hard, obviously, to know, but a few immediately come to mind, and a general area of the city does as well. This part of town is no stranger to murder and disappearances. A few years back, there was a case of several prostitutes that went missing from this particular Santa Ana area, as well as the neighboring city of Anaheim. A fucking brilliant detective by the name of Julissa, I believe, was able to arrest and convict the serial murderers Stephen Dean Gordon and Frank Cano of the kidnapping, rape, torture, and murders of 4 of the 5 women. The case is terrifying and gut-wrenching, but it's also mind-blowing on how they cracked it as well. I'll most likely cover it at some point on this podcast, but anyway, it's a case that immediately comes to mind because some of these women were known to be tied to some seedy motels in Santa Ana. There's also other countless deaths and violence and suicides tied to some Santa Ana motels, and it's just like an overall sense of fuck when you see that these calls for this case were tied there. So the police looked into the calls that originated from these two motels, but were unable to come up with anything. I guess being that it was back in the 80s and being 3 months later after they had occurred, that seems like an acceptable outcome, but it kind of bugs me. Regardless, people then turn their attention to the third number. By people, I mean police, my bad. The number is actually a teen sexual assistance hotline, quote unquote, which I didn't even know existed, period. The number is traced to a doctor in California. Again, no fucking name is given. Annoying. The police question this doctor dude, and he states that he has nothing to give them. He doesn't know Laureen, never heard of her, doesn't recognize her, and it's just like, yeah, sorry, can't help you. At that point, they clear him as a suspect and go about their way. Unfortunately, this is where the case begins to go cold again. However, Mama Judith wasn't having it. She, to this day, stands by the thought that those calls were made by Laureen. She stated that Laureen wanted to move to Hollywood and become an actress, so for her, the California lead is too much of a coincidence. Police, however, started to feel differently. We're not done, though, with these mysterious calls. So for months after Laureen's disappearance, Judith stated that she started receiving random silent calls at around 3:45 a.m., which ironically happened to be the same time she reported Laureen missing, on a consistent basis. The caller never said anything, and eventually Mama Judith would just hang up. She claims she notified the police of the disturbing calls. She also states that when she mentioned the calls to her sister said she had been receiving the same type of calls and that the calls would become more frequent towards the holidays. Mama Judith apparently decided to just stop reporting the calls to police at some point and was just going to wait for the person on the other line to speak, but that never happened. It's said that during the mid-80s, Mama Judith eventually changed her phone number and the calls ceased. A lot of people find it odd that she would do this, especially if she felt that her daughter was still alive and trying to contact her. Like I previously mentioned, she did eventually move to Florida, so this could be a potential reason for the number change. I'm not sure how I feel about this. I mean, more recently, it appears that her mom is still rocking the notion that her daughter is alive and is even consulting psychics. We've all told her her daughter hasn't passed, further feeding her belief that Laureen is alive. But I feel like if I genuinely believed my child was still alive and just trying to contact me, I'd be hanging on to the number till the day I fucking died. It's the only way my kid would be able to contact me. So that one leaves me feeling a little weird, but I don't know. According to an article, Jo Beth Swanson, one of Laureen's aunts, has chosen to keep her phone number the same all these years for that specific reason. So in 1981, Mama Judith received a call from an unnamed relative who swore up and down that they saw Laureen at a bus stop in Boston, Massachusetts. The relative did not approach the suspected Laureen, which, why wouldn't you if you were so sure it was her, but alright, but was pretty damn sure it was her. The police followed this lead, but were never able to confirm who they saw was in fact Laureen. Now, in 1985, Mama Judith had been sitting on the idea that Kristen and Manboy had not been completely truthful with what they knew about that night. She was adamant that they knew more, but oddly enough, their story never actually changed. Sometime during this year, Manboy had committed suicide. So this is sad, but it is also really interesting because the investigators surrounding this case have been so tight-lipped over the years, and the details about this case are so general, it's hard to know for sure that this isn't tied to the case. Obviously, the guy had a life completely separate from what happened to Laureen that we don't know about. We don't know what he was experiencing or dealing with or feeling, and it is completely possible that this death was not directly related to any sort of guilt he may have been carrying regarding Laureen's disappearance. As far as my research goes, the police never found a connection and never felt he was a suspect in this case. Mama Judith and myself, quite frankly, disagree. It's just too much of a coincidence for me. And I kind of have a little theory of my own in regards to Manboy that I'll talk about later. But at this point, Mama Judith decides to hire a private investigator. Some stories said that the investigator just milked her for her money and never actually provided any sort of leads or new information. But essentially, the PI picked up where the police left off with the collect calls and